The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix just ended, and I think we got a better show than we did there in Bahrain. We had some DNFs, some fun racing, got an introduction to some young talent and what the future may hold for F1, and the voodoo wheel takes claim to its first victim. Hey yo, Chris here. Thanks for tuning into the Delta. Like and subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a lot with just 2 clicks of a button. And you can stay up to date with my video uploads where I try to be informative and entertaining about Formula 1 races and events. I had shot this video once already, but my dog decided to be pretty much disgusting in the background without me noticing until it was far too late and far too much footage was recorded. But that's enough of that. Let's dig into the race in Jeddah today, and I will try to keep it short, but there's a decent amount of stuff to discuss. The first thing we will discuss is the winner. It's obvious, it's not surprising, it was Max Verstappen. It's very apparent that he is just in a world of his own out there, just driving around like you and I were to commute to work one day. But he started with the lead, he held the lead, except for a brief moment where he had to go to the pits, and then he quickly overtook everybody and got the lead back, and then never looked back on his way to winning the race. Everyone is just aware of it. We know it, the teams know it, even the TV broadcast doesn't seem to care or discuss it too much anymore, but there's a silver lining to that. And that is, we don't now have to listen to the broadcast just talking about Verstappen for an hour, hour and a half. And then that also allows the broadcast to talk about, the race going on behind Max Verstappen. And I think it's kind of nice because I felt like I actually learned some stuff about the sport in today's race because we didn't just sit there and focus on Max Verstappen just winning by a country mile. I learned how to enjoy racing besides wondering who's just going to win the entire thing. We had a nice little Mercedes McLaren battle that we got to witness. I learned a little bit about strategy and the way Haas performed out there. We got to see why the battles in the mid-pack and the back of the pack are actually important, because today's race, the 9th and 10th positions were viable for those teams, and we got to see them duke it out and what was the importance of that. And we obviously can't forget about Oliver Behrman and his performance in that Ferrari. We'll talk more about that later. And just an overall entertaining and interesting race than last round in Bahrain. Moving on to the podium. The podium drivers not named Max today were Sergio Perez, who placed in second. Not contested hardly at all, except for the beginning of the race. He's in the Red Bull. He's just as fast, just not as good as Verstappen, it seems like. He even received a 5-second penalty for an unsafe release in the pits, and it didn't even have an effect on his end result. So Sergio Perez easily takes the second position. And then you have Charles Leclerc, who got his first podium of the season, coming in at third. I don't necessarily feel like he was contested throughout much of the race either for that, outside of him losing his P2 spot pretty quickly after the race start, Checo. But besides that, I felt his performance was really, really good. And it's apparent that Leclerc was going to take third, barring a red flag or binning it into the wall or some catastrophic event that would greatly impact the race. So, it is Ferrari. It wasn't like I ruled those possible outcomes out, but it's just if the race was going to be held into its static position like it did, Leclerc wasn't contested or wasn't going to have to fight for that third place spot. But it did tell me that Red Bull is still out there on their own, doing their own thing, and Ferrari is still clearly the second best car amongst the other group of cars out there, at least for a duration of a race. Only time will tell if Ferrari can and will make the proper changes to catch up to Red Bull, but right now I just don't see that. So, I don't know. It's a long season, and it's still the second race where Ferrari clearly looked better than the rest of the field by a decent margin. But we'll see how this season progresses and if anyone can catch Ferrari or if Ferrari can catch Red Bull. But talking about the rest of the field, Mercedes still seems to be missing pace or something. I can't quite put my finger on it, but they just aren't where they want to be yet. I'm sure given the circumstances, they are happy about George Russell's sixth place finish. And even with the fact that Hamilton was battling Norris there at the end of the race was a sign that they aren't like miles away or anything like that from the teams that they feel they should be beating. So just need more time to figure it out. At the end of the day, Lewis comes in ninth and Russell in sixth, and both drivers get points for the team. McLaren is also in the same boat though, and one of the weird things was that Piastri still found a way to finish in fourth place, kind of silently. I was watching the majority of the race and eventually just lost where Piastri was. Then the next thing I knew, I looked up in the standings and Piastri was in fourth. So good for him and good for McLaren for picking up points in a time where their car is clearly not where they want it to be. Norris, on the other hand, he kind of went with an interesting route when they decided not to pit stop when that safety car came out, which I can only assume was a strategy in place with anticipation that another yellow flag or race incident would occur, which would allow them to put on a better compound for a late race stint. Just never happened, and Norris was kind of forced into that 8th and 9th place battle with Hamilton for the majority of the last part of the race, ended up finishing in 8th. McLaren issues definitely seem to lie within the straights. Lando Norris brought it up in an interview. I watched a recording of it, so I don't know if he said this prior to the race or post qualifying, but he basically did say that like he's aware that their weakness is on the straight line speed, and they are going to be working fervently to fix it. And that was showcased today during the race when Piastri really struggled to pass Hamilton until Hamilton inevitably had to go into the pits. It was just odd because there are some really good opportunities to pass on the straights on today's track. And with DRS and with a slipstream, Piastri just couldn't find a way to get by Hamilton. So one is McLaren clearly is lacking in the straight line speed department. But two, I also wonder, while Mercedes is still missing some components to their race, I wonder if their straight line speed is superior. Like if McLaren was stuck behind an Aston Martin or even a Ferrari, for instance, like would Piastri have been struggling to pass those cars? Then it be a strictly McLaren issue, or is Mercedes just better on the straight line and that's why it was so difficult for McLaren to pass? But then we can also move on to Aston Martin, who had a fair strategy. I think overall it wasn't great, it wasn't bad, just decent racing outside of Stroll. Lance Stroll did Stroll things and bent it into a wall, which removed him from the race. And that's where we got our little excitement of the race, at least, compared to last week where everyone finished with no incidences. So that was kind of interesting and fun and a change of pace. I don't really like to bring individuals down on this channel. That's not the trajectory I want this channel to go, is just like bashing drivers. I mean, one, they are significantly better at their job than I am at their job, but I really just don't care for Stroll. Like, especially when I see the performances of Oliver Behrman today and even performances last year by Liam Lawson. It's just tough for me to get behind, like, accepting the fact that Lance Stroll has a seat. But it is what it is. We just have to deal with those realities. But even the announcer said Stroll's not a rookie anymore. And basically that the mistake that he made in today's race shouldn't be a common mistake for a veteran such as Stroll, who makes these mistakes pretty consistently. But moving on to Fernando Alonso, he finished in 5th for a nice performance and earning some points for himself and the team. I don't really know what to think about the Aston Martin. They clearly aren't designed for the duration of a race, but they do have some decent one-lap speed that was been shown in their practice and qualifying. Maybe they can build on that, and then who knows what can happen. Maybe they become the dark horse and find a way to be better than Mercedes and or McLaren by the end of the year. It's just hard to get there when you have Stroll holding you back in the Constructors' Championship, getting these DNFs or races that he's just not accumulating points. Meanwhile, you have Fernando Alonso that is able to accumulate points. So like the car is clearly decent enough to be a point getter, and it just, you deduce that it's Stroll not getting the job done. And then you got the rest of the field. I think Ayu Komatsu has been hustling us all this entire time. He started the season, before the season even started, he said, "Oh, I just don't think we're going to be very good. We're going to be in the back of the pack. Expect that." And let's be honest, I don't think Haas is horrible. Obviously, I don't think they're going to win the Constructors or Drivers' Championship. But whatever they have now, and with their strategies, they're finding a way to be competitive. I know K-Mag got those penalties, and that is a topic for contention. And maybe it's my naivety, but some are going to say that those penalties were steep. Others will say they were completely unwarranted. I'm sure some may even say that they weren't severe enough. But what I got out of the whole situation is I have no idea what a steward does, or how they do their job at least. We're hammering Magnussen for 2 10-second penalties, meanwhile letting Lando Norris walk with an early launch at the start of a race. It just seems like there's no rhyme or reason to their decisions, and for a new viewer, or even someone such as myself with a few years under my belt, like, I still don't clearly know how to identify what a penalty is. I kind of wish penalties would be a bit more common. It would add some excitement to the race while also adhering to a more true form of racing, keeping it like pretty simple. Stay in the lines, stay safe, don't cut corners. And if we could just make that a more definitive black and white definition, then all the teams and drivers would just have to adjust to that and just be like, well, he cut that corner and that's a penalty, and it's a 3-second penalty or a 5-second penalty. It doesn't really matter, but the fact is it's always a penalty. And then we don't have to sit there and be like, well, George Russell went out track limits 3 times. Why didn't you penalize him? And I only went out track limits 1 time, but you penalized me. And then one race 2 weeks ago, we didn't do any. We all cut corners and we never got penalized. And this race, we're cutting corners and we are getting penalized. Or, I mean, it's just it's inconsistent and it's hard to follow. I just wish there was a little bit more consistency with it. But nonetheless, K-Mag's overall performance resulted in great teamwork. He was holding that entire pack behind him back, which led to Nico Hülkenberg getting that 10th place position and earning their first points for the season. So good for Haas. As for the other teams, Williams was pretty disappointing. Usually, it's easy to point that finger as like, that's Sargent. Sargent is the reason why they suck. But I don't think it was just Sargent today. Like, he didn't have a great race, but it looked like Albon struggled out there a bit too. I don't know if it's like a driver thing or a team strategy thing or a car thing, but I just wasn't impressed with Williams' overall performance, and I'm sure they're not either. They are going to have to figure something out though, because they are on the cusp of points. Like, they can do it. If they get whatever is ailing them figured out, they can start earning some points, because Albon finished 11th, and like I said, Sargent didn't have the greatest performance, but he did move up 4 spots, finishing in 15th. You know, we get Sargent finishing or qualifying in 14th spot, and Albon finding a way to get into the points range. I mean, you could talk about a good race day in a decent car that double points for the team, where Sargent gets 10th and Albon gets 8th, and that's a good race weekend for them. And they're just not there. They're not dead in the water, but they're clearly not competitive quite yet. Now, on the other hand, RB is just not getting the job done. Yuki raced really hard out there today, at least from my perspective. I got the F1 channel or F1 app or whatever, and it's really cool. And I tune into like Yuki's onboard, and it looks like he's like giving it his all. He's not making many mistakes. He's just racing, and it's just not working out for him. He just didn't have an answer for Albon. He didn't even have an answer for Esteban Ocon, you know, who were ahead of him by the end of the race. And poor Daniel Ricciardo, like, he just doesn't have it. And again, I'm not sure if it's him or the car or the strategy, combination of all three, but the performances he has put out in the first 2 races are just not what he needs if he's looking to take a seat in a more prominent team next year. At the end of the day, Tsunoda finished 14th, Ricciardo finished 16th in an underwhelming performance, and I'm sure they're sitting there wondering where things are going wrong and how they can get them resolved. Alpine is also clearly not doing well. Gasly had to retire before the end of the first lap with a gearbox issue that he reported to over the radio during the formation lap. And shortly there, after race start, they called him back in and said, "You're done. You got to bring the car back in." Not really good. Not having a reliable car, I think, is a major issue. Just seeing how last season and even this season, like last race, even like cars are just not failing that much. And so when one does now, it is rather alarming. You're like, wow, like Gasly DNF'd in the first lap because their car stinks, you know? But on a happier note, Ocon, he put a bit better of a performance at this race, coming in 13th when he started there in 17th. Maybe that doesn't happen if Stroll isn't Stroll and Gasly stays in. Maybe he's further back. But for Ocon to climb 4 spots in an Alpine should be encouraging, at the very least, for the team. Now, the team that we should be talking about, Kick Sauber. The Voodoo Wheel hit them this day and makes the Voodoo Wheel 1-0, showing off its mystical powers. Let's start with free practice 3. Guan Yu crashed at the end of the third practice, totaling his car, which led to a late qualifying opportunity. But while he was out on his flying lap, he ran out of time before he can even record an actual lap time. Thus, he started last to start the race today. Bottas, more or less non-existent the entire race. I think I saw him moving up and down a little bit there in the beginning, but pretty much by the time things were kind of stamped in, you saw that he was in the back of the pack. Like, way, way in the back. And then there was an opportunity for Guan Yu to have a salvageable race, but with the strategy to keep him out during the safety car, forced a late pit stop in the race where everyone knew they just weren't going to hold that 11th spot. Haas was able to shine and get a point. And this is where the Voodoo Wheel struck its hardest and cast a pit stop malfunction spell on Guan Yu. Came into the pits. There was something that went wrong. They couldn't get the tires on and off properly. And next thing you know, Guan Yu was stuck in the pits. And next thing you knew, the kick cars were in the very, very back as Guan Yu came back to the race behind Bottas. Thus, Kick loses their 6th place spot in the constructor standing and allows Haas to enter the Voodoo Wheel vacancy for next race's predictions. Now, for the narrative of the day, Oliver Behrman, the man of the bear, driver of the day. What a magnificent performance by the kid. He was 18 years old, woke up on Friday and told Carlos Sainz's appendix had failed him, and he will be taking the seat in a Ferrari to try to help the team earn some points in a fast, tight street circuit in Jeddah. The results? Wow. 7th place. I was a little nervous coming into the race, just taking all the things I just said out, just based on Friday's performance and the mistakes he made. I was sitting here saying, like, man, these F1 veterans are going to eat this poor kid alive. And well, he proved me wrong. And he proved that he probably deserves, at the bare minimum, another opportunity in the future. He raced well, he kept it clean, he had some great overtakes, and he handled the car excellently. That's the best way I could put it. And you got the feeling that there was something special about him. Now, I will say, I'm probably going to be the guy that everyone wants to boo now. Let's just pump the brakes a little bit. I was on the old Twitter during the race, and talking about Twitter, you should go follow the Delta at the Delta F1. But when I was reviewing his live performance via the Twitterverse, all I could see is like, oh, he deserves a seat, and we need more teams, and we need to get rid of other drivers to make room for these young talents. And I say, that sounds exciting and fun, but we need to take a look at this realistically. And the first one is, he was in a Ferrari. And that is a huge advantage. he was in a Ferrari and still didn't manage to get to the third round in quali. It's not his fault. I'm not mad at him for doing that, or I think he's a failure because he didn't do that. He's never done this before at this level. But I'd be willing to bet that most of the current drivers, given the opportunity to drive a Ferrari, are probably making Q3. Plus, let's say we let some of these young drivers in. Are they taking Sainz's seat next year? Is Ferrari ditching the Hamilton deal over Behrman? Are they telling Leclerc to kick sand so Ollie can take his seat? In fact, are any of the teams that are on top doing that for a young driver? You can maybe argue, given the information we know about Hamilton, maybe Mercedes can try to poach and offer Ollie a seat. I don't even know that's allowed. I don't know the rules like that. But that's the only vacant seat I could see Ollie getting into, and I still doubt that that is plausible. So I'm just saying that, like, in reality, Oliver Behrman doesn't start his career in a Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, or even an Aston Martin, unless you get rid of Stroll. But when he does get there, if he gets there, he is probably going to be racing for Kick or RB, Alpine, or Williams at best. Is he making the moves that he did today in an RB? Is he qualifying P11 in a Kick or an Alpine? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just, I don't want to poo-poo a guy on one of his greatest days of his life. It's just, if that is all true, I just don't think we're sitting here saying, oh, wow, look how impressive that Oliver Behrman is, who placed 16th in the RB car today. So I do wish there was a better way to showcase these young talented drivers so we could justify removing the Strolls and the Sargents in the field. But just the way that F1 is structured makes it really, really hard for me to see, like, where these drivers coming out of Formula 2 can actually be. I don't know how there could be a change, because the feeling I got was I wanted more Behrman. But unless Leclerc's appendix bursts there for Australia, we probably aren't seeing the kid again the rest of the season. And it's just kind of not fair. I left the race super excited and super happy for the kid, but just knowing what I know about the mid to bottom tier teams where Behrman would most likely get his next opportunity, if he would get one, the results are just not going to be the same. And slowly but surely, the excitement of the day Oliver Behrman in a Ferrari places P7 would just dissipate as he just regularly finishes out of the points in an RB or an Alpine or even a Williams. I love the display today. I just wish there was a better way to get these new drivers better opportunities for Formula One. But that's it. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is donezo, and we are off to the Land Down Under with my excellent accent attempt there. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the race, though. Will anyone crack this Red Bull code? How confident are you in the Ferrari car this year? Does Oliver Behrman deserve another shot in F1? And where do you think he'd end up if he ever gets his opportunity? And who in the back of the pack has the greatest chance to climb into the points and enter the midfield? Overall, a much more fun experience this race compared to Bahrain. Again, we had some exciting things to be interested in, with Mercedes McLaren battling it out, and the real race going on in the back of the pack fighting for that final point. You had Oliver Behrman narrative to top it all off. Just made for a fun race, as I slowly forgot about the front of the pack and gradually ignored it as the race went on. So I leave this week excited for Australia. Stay tuned into the channel. I will try to come up with some content to hold us over until the next race. But also, please don't be surprised if I go dark for a little bit. It's just about baby time over there for the family, and I may be busy, with the introduction of a new human into the world. But until next time, take care, stay safe, and have fun out there. Bye, everybody. Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning in. If you're enjoying this video, you're going to love what we have over on Twitch. Over there, I may play many games, but with the F1 season quickly upon us, I want you to join me with some F1 gaming content. I am thinking of playing games like F1 23 or F1 Manager on Thursdays and or Friday nights prior to the actual race in real life. For example, if they are racing in Silverstone, we race in Silverstone, and see how we stack up as a driver or team manager. Over there, we can chat about F1, share some opinions, stories, jokes, or anything really, accompanied by some fun Formula One gameplay. Head over to the Twitch channel at twitch.tv/delta_4_7_G to join the fun. Don't miss out, hit that follow button, and be a part of the action. See you there. Oh, too fast, slow down. Well, missed all those.